Welcome back to Logic Basics. We're in part 2 of a series on skepticism, if you recall, and this time we're going to talk about popular skepticism. So let's return to the handout. Remember, skepticism is the position that says that we really can't know for sure. Knowledge is not possible. And we're going to look at some popular ways of saying that. Nobody really goes around saying nobody can know for sure unless it comes up, right? So we say it in different ways. And this handout is going to show us the many ways it comes across. There may be more than these, but I'm going to call these person on the street skepticism or coffee house skepticism. And I say that with a smile because when I was a student, I used to study at this particular coffee shop pretty much every day, and I would have all my notes spread out on the table, and I would be studying away, and someone would always come up to my table and say, "Hey, what are you studying?" You know, like they were really interested. And then I'd say, "Oh, I'm studying philosophy." And then they would give me one of these skeptical claims. For example, "Oh, there are so many views." And I took those claims to be conversation stoppers, because when someone says there are so many views, where do you go from there? And they came over to my desk. So I don't know what they thought they would get out of it by making this skeptical claim. So remember, we want to do a couple of things: clean up the discourse, and we want to challenge skepticism whenever we encounter it. Now, this discussion is going to take us into logic, and we're going to start doing logic today. So let's first look at the definition of popular skepticism here. It says the following are common popular skeptical statements which stand as roadblocks to conversation, and how we may respond to these statements in order to make progress in dialogue. So we want to have conversations that are meaningful with people, and we want to have philosophical conversations, religious conversations, political conversations that don't end up in people being frustrated or saying we really can't know. All right, so this first one's going to take a little time to discuss. This first skeptical claim, I should also show you how this is laid out. So the skeptical claims are in bold. This one says there are so many views, right? And I have it in my head in a certain way. There's so many views. It's a little attitude. R1 and R2 are going to be our responses to these skeptical claims. A little bit of wind picking up outside here. So the first response is going to need some explanation, okay, because this is going to take us into doing some logic. The first response says there are not many basic views, only two. So remember when we used that square of opposition last time to talk about some is clear versus nothing is clear? We're going to use the square of opposition again to look at all is eternal or only some is eternal. So I want to introduce you to the square of opposition. I've made some pictures here. I used my iPad to draw it. It's easier than typing it. And I want to show you 4 different positions on the square. Actually, I have a simplified version here. Here's a simpler one. So we have 4 corners. All is eternal goes here. None is eternal goes here. Some is eternal is here, and some is not eternal is here. This square of opposition gives us logical options, and at this point is giving us our logical options about eternal. Eternal means no beginning and no end. Now the third picture I'm going to show you has some definitions on it, so you can see it in writing and take it with you. The square of opposition is a square because it has different relationships. This diagonal relationship, if you remember from last time, represents contradictions. So contradictions are the diagonals. Some is eternal is contradicted by none is eternal. They cannot both be true and they cannot both be false. All is eternal is contradicted by some is not eternal. Now let me go back to this other slide I had for you with more detail. All right, now this one in the lighter blue is what the statement would look like in its logical form, where S stands for the subject and P stands for the predicate. And in our example, all is missing a concept here. The subject term is missing. It would be all that exists is eternal, But since is also implies existence, it would be like all that is eternal. So all S is P. This one is no S is P. I is some S is P, and O is some S is not P. So I have A, E, I, and O listed here as well. These are the corners of the square's names. We're going to learn how to use this square inside and out as we go along. It's a way of putting judgments into relationship with one another and testing them to see whether they are true or false or doubtful. Notice the A statement is a universal all, and it's affirming is. E is a universal none, and it's a negative. That's also in the none. None is or no is. So it's a universal negative. So the universals are on the top. Then we go down here to the I statement, which is a particular, which means at least one. At least one thing is eternal, is this claim. And it's affirming. So some is a particular, and it's affirming is. And then O is the particular negative. So some, at least one, is not. That's the negative part. So notice we have our logical options laid out on the square. A universal affirmative, universal negative, particular affirmative, particular negative. On this side of the square, we have affirmatives. On this side of the square, we have negatives. The tops are universals, the bottoms are are particulars. Okay, now you don't need to know all this right now. I'm showing this to you because we're going to use this now to answer that claim that said, hang on, I just put the wrong thing away. That claim that said there are not many basic views, only two. So let's look at those two claims on the square now. Here I've put the claims into the square. So here's all is eternal, none is eternal, some is eternal, and some is not eternal. I also put the definitions at the bottom of this one. Eternal means it has no beginning and no end. Temporal is the opposite of eternal. It means it had a beginning. And just for fun, I put everlasting here because sometimes people have questions about that. Everlasting is a version of temporal that has no end. So everlasting has a beginning, but it doesn't have an end. It goes on forever and ever. Okay, now this, back to this. There are not many basic views, only two. All or only some is eternal. All right, so let's go back to, let's see. I might have to cycle through a couple of slides. Here we go. So we have all is eternal is here, and it's contradicted by some is not eternal. And then we have some is eternal here, contradicted by none is eternal. We're going to eliminate none is eternal as a logical option and as a metaphysical option. So this is fun. We get to do some logic right now. This position is not going to be left standing on the square. It says none is eternal, which means the same thing as all is temporal. Whereas temporal, we just said, means all had a beginning. Temporal means had a beginning. So if everything is temporal, everything had a beginning, which means all came into being. And I have this square around being, which means all came into being from non-being. And I have a square around non-being because this is saying being came from non-being. And we already know that that can't happen because being is something that has something that exists. It has properties. It has the power to be. It cannot come from something that does not exist, has no properties, and has no power to be. That's like saying something can come from nothing. So being is something, non-being is no thing. So this position, nothing is eternal, is impossible. It cannot be. So something is eternal must be true. So we can say at this point, it is clear to reason that at least something is eternal. Now we need to go back to our square. Okay, once we eliminate none is eternal, which used to be here, we have three options left. Some is eternal, all is eternal, some is not eternal. Now, some is eternal plus some is not eternal is the same as saying only some is eternal. At this point, we have three positions on the square. We know something must be eternal, but we don't know what it is yet. it's possible that all is eternal includes some is eternal, because all may include some. Or it's possible that some is and some isn't. So what we need to do is to reduce some is eternal and some is not eternal to only some is eternal. And then we put it on the square like this. We have two new contradictory positions. All is eternal or only some is eternal. And I put their positions. We mentioned no one's fully conscious or consistent, and there are many degrees of rational consistency with which a basic view is held. So the basic view is all is eternal, but all could be matter. So material monism is the view that there's just one thing and it's material, matter and energy. Everything is matter and energy. It has size, and there's no non-material stuff. There's no souls. There's no God. Or maybe everything is spirit and there is no matter. So there's just one thing under spiritual monism, and that one thing is spirit, consciousness. There is no material stuff. It just appears to exist. It's an illusion. So those two are contradictory positions. And then there's a third position under all is eternal called dualism. There's two things that are eternal. Matter is eternal and spirit is eternal. And that's a position that Aristotle and Plato take. So these are three philosophical positions that say all is eternal. They're different from each other, but they all share the assumption that all is eternal. So think of the house. You can put each of these pink words in that foundation part of the house, and how the house is constructed will look differently for each. Now down here we have only some is eternal, and only some is eternal is like saying there's a being that's eternal that created everything that is not eternal. So a creator, God, and a creation. So creator is eternal, creation is temporal. And this view is held by theists and deists. So I put theism and deism here as big categories. Theism includes Judaism, Christianity, Islam. So all of those say only some is eternal. Now going back to the square and the implications of reason, these two positions represent all of the world's philosophies and all of the world's religions. They cannot both be true and they cannot both be false. So if we could know by reason which one of these was false, we could eliminate it, like we eliminated none is eternal, and we'd be left with the last position standing. Is it going to be all is eternal or only some is eternal? That's your cliffhanger. Can we get through that discussion? All right, I'm going to pause here with the pictures and go back to the handout. And we did all that work to say there are not many basic views, only two. So now I have hopefully proven to you that there are two basic views. And I've also shown you there are many degrees of rational consistency with which these basic views are held. I feel like we should pause here because that was a lot to comprehend, and maybe we should take some time to digest that first one before we go on to the next 6 popular skeptical claims. So let's pause here. I want you to think about this. What did we do today? We showed that there are not many basic views. There's only 2 basic views. We used the square of opposition to show that. And at the end of this discussion, you should have an argument that something, at least something, must be eternal. We did that by showing none is eternal, led to being coming from non-being, which violates the laws of thought and the laws of being. So you should be able to show something must be eternal, and you should be able to overcome the skeptical claim that says that there are so many views. There are not many basic views, only 2, but there are many degrees of rational consistency with which one of these basic views are held. So hopefully this gives you a little more confidence, a little more competence in the use of reason to find meaning and settle disputes. This was a big dispute. If we can show that something must be eternal, that it's clear to reason that something must be eternal, we've gone a long way. So next time we'll cover the rest of the popular skeptical claims.